Hey, good morning, everybody. Lance Tarchioni here with you. Just kind of starting a moment or two early so I can make sure I've got everything working right. Can't hide my double chin from this angle. It might actually be a triple chin from this angle. Sitting in my truck, as you can tell. So I'm in rural eastern Knox County, kind of pretty close to Peoria and Stark County. Headed to a meeting at the Strum Family Farms as soon as we're done here. It's a farm forward conference that I was invited to. Grant Strum is a good plot cooperator of ours and good customer. Going to be some interesting speakers at this meeting, and so I thought I would try to join in today. So I am setting at their grain bin site actually, and Jennifer, I got far enough away from the grain bin that my signal seems to be good. So apologies that we will not be glitching and buffering as bad as we were 2 weeks ago. So lesson learned for me: when there's a flurry of activity in the chat from my production team talking about how awful the broadcast is, I should just stop. So I now know better. But looks like I might have a little breakfast on me there too. Sorry about that. Anyway, so lesson learned there, and I am looking forward to maybe 2 weeks from now. Maybe we'll be back in the studio. Maybe I'll have one of my security blankets back with me, either Jennifer or Adam. I don't honestly like doing these by myself, but sometimes it's just the way just the way we have to do them to make things work. So, big shout out this morning to my friend and colleague Nick Weber. So I called Nick. Nick works in St. Louis. I called Nick at 6:23 this morning on his cell phone. Thought I might catch him in a morning commute, perhaps. He was still at home. Didn't think about the fact that a lot of people these days don't have to go into the office anymore. He was working from home. But pretty cool that you can call a St. Louis guy and get him at 6:23 in the morning. I had an idea that I wanted to share with him, and we are going to launch here today on Ask the Agronomist something that I'm going to call National Fall Burn Down Appreciation Day. Now, we don't have an official date set. I mean, we could say it's March 7th. Now, in some years, March 7th would be too early for National Fall Burn Down Appreciation Day. But this year, with the unseasonably warm February and the warm March that we've had, things are greening up. I had a guy send me a picture of some cover crop that was about ready to be taken out the other day. And we're gonna talk about how to decide when you terminate your spring cover crops. We're gonna talk about spring burn downs. We're gonna talk a lot about herbicide stuff. And let's see, says the chat disconnected. Sometimes when the chat disconnects, that's bad. So anyway, hopefully things are good. So Jennifer, if things are not good, let me know. So anyway, we're going to be kicking off this National Fall Burn Down Appreciation Day, and the reason I want to do that, and the reason now is the appropriate time for that, is this is always the time of year when you start to regret that you did not do a fall burn down. And that feeling stays with you about until July. And then by the time October, November roll around, when it's the appropriate time to do a fall burn down, you've lost the passion that you had back in the spring for actually doing a fall burn down. So I'm trying to increase the awareness around how wonderful fall burn downs are, how wonderful they look today. If you look at any field that got a fall burn down, unless you did something horribly wrong, they are clean as a whistle. And the fields that did not get a fall burn down, the chickweed, the henbit, the mare's tail, the shepherd's purse, that stuff is already green and growing. You can tell it's out there. I've got a neighbor of mine across the road that did a vertical tillage pass and then fall anhydrous. And last fall, I mean, you would have thought that was a clean field. It looked very nice. And it still looks very nice, except it's green with chickweed, mare's tail, henbit, pennycress, shepherd's purse, yada, yada, yada. So, I guess just try to remember that when fall rolls around, and you didn't like how your fields looked this spring, just try to remember that when it's fall burn down season, take advantage of the fact that it's fall burn down season. We had a great fall last year for fall burn down, and lots of things can get you out of the mood. Sometimes your applicator might be kind of whiny because they're busy doing anhydrous, they're busy doing fertilizer, they're busy with this or busy with that, or they've already got their sprayer winterized and they don't really want to be dealing with a sprayer when we're having freezing temperatures, or maybe you've looked at the price of doing it, or maybe somebody like me recommended that you ought to have Roundup in your fall burn down. You're like, well, I don't want to do that because I can't just spray through my waterways and spray over my fence rows and be really sloppy with it because I'm going to be killing stuff that I don't want to kill. And there's any number of reasons why you can talk yourself out of doing that fall burn down. Pardon me. I'm going to get my phone here where I can see it in case the production staff is texting me in a panic or something. All right. Last text I got says mine's still working, so we're going to go with that. So anyway, fall burn downs are not hard. The hardest thing about fall burn down is committing to doing it. You can use residuals. You don't have to. You can use Roundup. Makes it better, but you don't have to. A fall burn down can be as simple as 2,4-D and dicamba, and that works pretty good. Throw in some Roundup, it works better. But like I said, if you got a bunch of waterways in a field and you don't want somebody killing your waterways, it's really easy to kill sod in the fall with Roundup. So you do have to be careful. And I've experienced this the hard way on the home farm that applicators don't all approach fall burn down with the same level of caution that they approach in season applications. So if they miss a little spot, no big deal. Or if they get a little wild here, no big deal. It's just a fall burn down. Well, next spring when you get that little triangle of green out there, you can send them a picture and say, I wish you would have sprayed that spot too. So I get it. That's the end of the year. Applicators are stressed. Applicators are tired of being in a sprayer. Christmas is coming, and that's the last place anybody wants to be is in a sprayer. So I get it. They want it to be simple. They want it to be easy, and it's pretty hard to screw up 2,4-D and dicamba. So anyway, keep that in mind. Watch for more coming on National Fall Burn Down Appreciation Day. Nick and I were joking. It might be something kind of like Easter, where it comes at different times from one year to the next, and you're really sure, when it's going to be here. And some years it's really early, and you're like, man, it seems too early for Fall Burn Down Appreciation Day, but it is. And in other years it might be later, and it's just going to kind of depend on lots of things. So that makes it good agronomy too, because you can use the it depends story. So anyway, enough about my idea for a national holiday. Let's talk about cover crops a little bit. So I got a picture earlier last week from a guy in Greene County, and he had gotten some crop out early, and he had seeded some cover crop early, and he actually drilled it, so it got off to a good quick start. That stuff was about 6, 7, 8 inches tall, this week. And he like, how big do I want to let this get? And there's lots of different schools of thought on when you should terminate spring cover crops. Some people, want to let them get big and plant green and plant into a jungle. Other people prefer to not add quite that much residue to their system, not remove quite that much water from their soil, not, lay down that heavy mat of fresh residue out there. And if that's your position, and that was this particular grower's position, well, then you want to take those out when they're still in a grass stage, leafy stage, and not starting to look like a grain crop. So, with the early green up, early warm up that we've had, we've now gotten some moisture. It's cooled off a little bit. But, if we got into a warm, wet stretch for a couple weeks, some of these cover crops would be probably bigger than maybe you intended them to be. So it's probably not too early to at least start thinking about, okay, when am I going to take that out? When am I going to terminate that? How am I going to do it? Am I going to make a separate pass just with Roundup, which that's what works best? You can put your residual chemistry in, but you run the risk of some antagonism on the cover crop. And it's really early to be putting out residual chemistry in either corn or soybeans. So my preference would be, if you're going to take your cover crop out this early, you just do it with a straight shot of Roundup. You make a separate pass to terminate the cover crop, and then either closer to planting or maybe even after planting is when you put your residuals down. And by that time, you've already terminated your cover crop, and you're not trying to do both at the same time. Not saying that you can't do both at the same time, but you have to make concessions to do both at the same time. You're either taking the cover crop out a little bit late, you're putting the residual on too early, you run the risk of antagonizing the control of the cover crop with residuals in the mix. If you've got any plans to put fertilizer on with that pass, I would not recommend trying to control cover crops with fertilizer as a carrier, because that is extremely antagonistic. And sometimes, cereal rye, wheat, especially annual rye, particularly, not super easy to keep in the spring always. And especially if you get some antagonism from some fertilizer or some chemistry. So just some things to keep in mind as you're thinking about terminating your spring cover crop. Maybe you use oats and radishes or something that the winter terminated your cover crop. You don't have to worry about that in the spring. That's the advantage of that's something to think about when you're trying to decide what are you going to use for a cover crop. Do you want it to be alive in the spring and need to kill it? Or would you rather just let the winter kill it and then you don't have to deal with killing it in the spring? Pros and cons both ways. And those of you that have worked with cover crops kind of know how to think through those decisions. I'm going to check the phone here. Like I say, I'm always nervous when I don't have my production team here with me to keep me on track. So let's talk spring burn down a little bit. So we talked about the need for fall burn down. We talked about the benefits of fall burn down. Well, if you didn't do a fall burn down, it's pretty obvious by now that you're going to need a spring burn down. And one of the biggest benefits, in my opinion, of fall burn down is it really gives you a lot of flexibility in how you manage weeds in season and what sort of herbicide program you want to do in season, because it gives you a lot more flexibility on timing. It gives you a lot more flexibility on products you can use. Oftentimes, if you do a good fall burn down, you really don't need a burn down in the spring. Or if you're using a residual product, like Trivolt would be an example in corn, that has pretty good burn down activity, you might not need any Roundup in your spring burn down pass if you had a fall burn down. Depends on how effective it was, how good it was, the timing, lots of things, and it's always a little dicey to pull out the Roundup anytime you're making a burn down application. But there are some scenarios following a fall burn down where you truly probably don't need it, and gives you a lot more flexibility of what you do in your herbicide program. So, from a spring burn down standpoint, you're primarily relying on either Roundup or Gramoxone. Maybe you're using a residual product that has okay, sorry. Every time I get a text, it freaks me out, thinking it's Jennifer or Adam saying, "Hey man, you're off the air, stop." But apparently that's not the case. So anyway, as you're thinking about those spring burn down applications, be careful if you're using fertilizer as a carrier, especially ammonium thiosulfate. My ATS fans out there, I love ammonium thiosulfate. Use it on every acre of corn I farm. I'd use it on every acre of soybeans I farm if it was compatible with dicamba and a burn down. But it can be difficult to work with from a compatibility standpoint. So make sure whoever doing your applications, knows what they're mixing, knows what they're doing, has had experience with it. Sometimes temperature and weather conditions can affect that. So, anytime you're, mixing things that were designed to mix in water in something that has water in it, but it's not water, things sometimes don't go according to plan. Plus, those products can be extremely antagonistic because you can get a lot of burn just from the fertilizer. And if you get burned from the fertilizer, sometimes your burn application is not as effective. So just things to keep in mind on your spring burn downs. So while we're on the herbicide topic, I want to touch on some soybean weed control reminders. So I mentioned earlier, it's too early for pre's in soybeans. I know it's feeling like an early spring, but it's a long time before there's going to be any water hemp germinating. So we don't want to be putting our PPOs, our metribuzins, our group 15s, our water hemp pre products. We don't want to be putting those out this early. And also, I feel I need to remind people that, with all that's been going on with dicamba labeling and the vacature and then this existing stocks use and all the conversations about that, please remember that unless you're more than 30 days ahead of planting, which we're already there, and you get an inch of rain or more after application, there's only 3 products dicamba is labeled to use in soybeans. And those would be the 3 over the top formulations. So those of you that might have heard that you don't have to use those pre, that's not really true. Because the way most people apply their pre's, the other products would be off label. So keep in mind that label for other dicamba products ahead of soybeans is 30 days minimum and an inch of rain from application to planting. So unless you're spraying really early or planting really late, probably something not good going on there. So that's all I'll say about that. You've been told. And let's talk a little bit about our a program that a lot of people have fallen in love with the last few years, which, depending on your ability to use dicamba post, kind of influences maybe the appeal of this program. But what's commonly called is known as row and go, and it's catchy. It works well. It's very effective. Basically, what beans with no chemistry in the soil. Now you should have a burn down or clean tillage. You don't want to, if you've got weeds when you plant, row and go is not going to work. You need to be planting into a clean seed bed. So if you're no-tilling, you needed to have at least a fall burn down, maybe also a spring burn down. And if you're doing tillage, it needs to be more than, hitting it with a Salford or a turbo till. That's not tillage. That's vertical tillage. There's a difference. Vertical tillage is for residue management. Tillage is for weed control. Vertical tillage is not for weed control. So if you're going to do row and go, you got to be clean when you plant. And what I'm going to start my truck back up here because I got 3 electronic devices pulling juice off my truck here this morning. So we're putting Chevy alternators to the test. I've got a planter at home. We had to put an auxiliary alternator on it, or generator actually, to generate all the electricity we need on our planter. And I may have to do that on my truck if I'm going to be doing mobile Ask the Agronomist a lot. But so back to row and go. So the way row and go works is you plant those soybeans into a clean seed bed, and then you let the beans get up about yay tall where you can row them, and you go. And that go is your residual plus Roundup plus Liberty, maybe plus dicamba, depending on your situation. If you can use dicamba, you're probably going to pull the Liberty out. But basically, it's burn down and your pre-emergent residual early post is what row and go is. And there's several advantages to that. Your beans typically get up out of the ground quicker. You get a little faster early growth because you don't have that herbicide stress. That's going to shift season application probably back a week or 2, which some people like. The idea that some people still have that certain things are making you spray your beans too early post. That's actually not true, because what you think is too early is just right. But I understand you still feel it's too early, and Row and Go lets you go a little later, which makes everybody feel warm and fuzzy because you can go later. And that Row and Go application is going to be followed up by a later in season kind of mid post application. So it's still going to be a 2-pass program. You're not going to get weed control with that one first pass. But instead of doing a pre followed by an early post, you're doing an early post followed by a sequential mid post. And that's what Row and Go is. So depending on your ability to, I'm a little uncomfortable with Row and Go, frankly, without dicamba. You could probably do it in some situations just with Roundup, Liberty, and residuals. But I prefer it a lot more with Roundup, dicamba, and residuals. But there are some different variations out there on it. And, now's the time to be finalizing your plans of, what program you're going to run, what timing you're going to try to do. Make sure that your applicator is on board with your plans and where your plans. Good time to be talking to your neighbors. Find out what your neighbor's going to be planting. If you and the neighbor planting the same thing, life gets a lot easier. If you and the neighbor not planting the same thing, we can deal with that, but we need to know it. Worst case scenario is you don't know what your neighbor's doing, and it's time to go spray. Don't get yourself in that one. That's one of my bigger pet peeves. So let's talk a little bit about corn weed control. So I mentioned earlier the burn down capabilities of Trivolt, and Trivolt's not the only popular corn herbicide that has burn down capabilities, but there's a lot of corn herbicide pre's. And if you're doing a good fall burn down, you're probably not going to need a spring burn down. And if you do have a little bit of stuff starting to come on, that residual that you're using is probably going to take that out. So you want to make sure if you're using your residual for burn down, you need to make sure you got the right oils and additives and such in there to maximize the burn down potential of that product. A lot of UAN and ATS gets used as a carrier in corn. Just be aware of the compatibility issues with that. Be aware of the potential antagonism with that. You guys that do it know what you're doing, so not a problem. And then I guess I'll ask a question. I heard from a lot of people that they were, let's say, less than satisfied with their water hemp control last year in corn. So what is your plan to get better water hemp control in corn this year than you did last year? Is your plan for it to just not be a drought and it's easier to kill water hemp this year? That might work. I don't know that that's a very good plan, but you might get away with that if drought stress was the reason you didn't get good control last year. Now, the unknown is, was some sort of resistance a factor in why you didn't get good control last year. So here are your options if you want to try to get better control other than just hoping for better spray conditions. So you could use a stronger pre. And the way to have a stronger pre is to pick a better product, add additional modes of action, and or increase your rate, or all of the above. So a lot of products have a rate range. And as farmers, we're trying to be at the lowest end of the rate range we can get away with, typically. Sometimes it's not so much the product, maybe it was the rate, and maybe a higher rate of the same thing would work better. Maybe you need a better product. Maybe you need to add another mode of action. But those are the 3 ways you can have a stronger pre. The other option is to have a better post. And a better post program could be maybe you do a better timing. Maybe you spray earlier. Maybe you use a different adjuvant. Maybe you use a higher rate. Maybe you tank mix in another mode. There's a lot of people that have been relying on HPPD chemistry for water hemp control post in corn. And as HPPD weed resistance increases, there's more of a need for dicamba or some other mode of action in corn to go along with the HPPD. I do not recommend pulling the HPPD out and replacing it with dicamba. A better approach is to add the dicamba to what you've been doing. Now, you might be able to use a reduced rate of the products in some cases, but just swapping one for the other may not improve your control as much as you would like. And it would be best to have both of those effective modes of action in there on that post trip. The last thing we need to think about with post trips in corn, do you plan to do a V5 fungicide? And if you plan to do a V5-ish fungicide, we need to have a corn program that's compatible with making applications at V5. So that means you need to have good crop safety from your herbicide. That means you need to have label flexibility to apply it that late. That means you need to have a good enough pre on that you can wait that long to put your post on. You know, there's some pre's that long before V5, they've broke and that field needs rescued. You don't want to be in that situation. You never. I love V5 fungicide. I think it's a good practice. I think more people should do it, but you never want to screw up your herbicide program trying to optimize the timing for your fungicide. If you have to spray early, just pull the fungicide out and forget it. Take care of the weeds. That's the main order of business when we're posting corn, is getting good weed control, not applying V5 fungicide. So keep your priorities on the weed control. Talk a little bit about spring fertilizer application. So we've had a great spring for doing whatever you want. We did finally get some moisture here earlier in the week, which was welcome. But we had a 2-week stretch here where you could do tillage, you could put on anhydrous. Heck, you could have been planting if you wanted to be. It was pretty darn fit. So we've had lots of good opportunities to get out and get stuff done in the field. If you wanted to get spring anhydrous on, would have been a great window to get that on. If you've got more to do, no harm done. Got plenty of time yet. But I love it when we can get spring anhydrous on 2 weeks plus ahead of planting. One of most agronomists' least favorite questions is, how long do I have to wait after my spring anhydrous application before I plant corn? That's a difficult question to answer honestly, safely, and accurately, and give somebody the answer they're looking for. Generally, the answer the grower's looking for is immediately. That's never the right answer, but there are situations where we try to squeeze that window as narrow as possible. I don't like doing that. There's certainly lots of people that have good luck with spring applied anhydrous, but if you've got to push it that much, I would much rather switch to another form of nitrogen. But if you're going to be using UAN and ammonium thiosulfate or some other sulfur source, we got plenty of time to make those applications yet. There's probably not really an advantage to rushing out there and getting that work done this early and letting that product just lay there. Another thing I wanted to touch on was get lots of questions about, is it okay to use ATS? I had this call just this week. Is it okay to use ATS ahead of my soybeans? And the answer to that is yes. You're not going to mess up the soybeans with the amount of nitrogen that's in ATS. Soybeans love sulfur just as much as corn. They don't require quite as much as corn, but they love it just as much as corn. And you absolutely will get quicker growth, quicker canopy, a more attractive looking crop early, putting some nitrogen and sulfur on soybeans. Can't promise you it's going to increase your yield. If your beans are deficient in sulfur, it will. But if there's adequate sulfur there from the soil, the little bit of nitrogen might be more cosmetic than it is agronomic. But if you like the idea of giving your soybeans a little bit of a spoon feeding pick me up early in the season, nothing wrong with using ATS in your bean program. Again, make sure it's compatible with the herbicides that you're running. People are a lot more used to using it in corn, so you start mixing it with stuff you've never mixed it with before, that could be a bad day. So just make sure you don't get yourself in trouble there. When we're talking UAN ahead of corn, I get a lot of questions on, how much should I use? I like to see 30 to 45 units of nitrogen on rotated ground and 45 to 60 units of nitrogen corn on corn. That does not have to be additional nitrogen. I like to make that part of my nitrogen budget. So when you're applying your anhydrous in the fall, or your spring anhydrous, or however you're putting on the bulk of your N, make sure and back your rate down, so that you've got room to put on an extra 30 to 60 units, depending on your scenario, in the spring as UAN. I just think the corn crop loves that. Readily available, easy to find, right there in the root zone, easy to take up, easy to use, nitrogen. And if you got starter on your planter, you probably get by without the broadcast application. Most of us don't have starter on our planter, so broadcast is kind of like lazy guy starter. If you're making the effort to put starter on, either in furrow, 2x2, what have you, then you probably do not need to broadcast any UAN, assuming you're getting enough nitrogen in that starter. If it's a pop-up, you probably still want to do the broadcast, because you're not going to get enough nitrogen in a pop-up. But if you're doing a traditional 2x2, you can get by without the broadcast. Don't have to do both. So let's talk a little tillage. So it's dangerous for a no-till guy to start talking about tillage. I need to call in my good friend and colleague Chris Cowell here, so he can lead the tillage conversation. But we've had lots of opportunities to go out and do some spring field work, and there's been some groundwork down. I've seen some fields that you could have pulled into and planted them. And I don't mind working if you've got to hit the field in the spring before you plant it to level it up. Nothing wrong with doing that early. There is something wrong with doing it twice. So if you want to go out there and work it down now and treat that like a stale seed bed and never touch it again, and plant right into that stale seed bed a month from now, and possibly do a burn down because you're going to have weeds coming up, or be using residuals that have the ability to control the small weeds that are coming up, that works great. That's a good system. That's a very good system. However, if you work it down now, and then a month from now, when you're ready to plant it, if you're going to work it again, don't do that. All that's doing is just damaging soil structure, putting compaction layers in your field. One spring pass is enough. 2 spring passes is generally not better. And so if you can work it now, and then the next thing that's in that field is the planter, or maybe a sprayer and a planter, that's awesome. That's what we call a stale seed bed. That works great. But if you're the kind of guy that is going to want to see it freshly worked right in front of the planter, then don't work it in February or March and then again in April. Just not necessary, not helpful, not beneficial, wasting your time and money and diesel fuel. Let's see. So that stale seedbed approach that I mentioned, where you worked it down, then don't touch it again. Some of the benefits to that is less compaction would be a big one. Less crusting is a big one. So if that soil has kind of firmed up and gotten its own crust, so to speak, on top, and you break through that with the planter, that's not going to recrust near like it will if you work it up again. If you work it fresh and then plant it, man, can that crust on you if you get the wrong kind of weather after planting. But those stale seed beds that were already worked earlier and then planted directly into, the physical properties of that soil are just different. It's not going to crust anywhere near like freshly worked ground would. The planter works better. Your planter's it's not sinking into the powder near as much. It's easier to maintain depth. You're less likely to get corn planted in a trough, which is always, when you got that trough there that the row is down in, and I cringe when I go past fields that the corn row is the lowest part of the field. And at some point you're going to drive by that field after a rain, and there's going to be a moat of standing water right down the top of every row, suffocating seeds and drowning stuff and herbicide, and just not a good scenario. So ideally, you want that field to be pretty level behind the planter, and that's really hard to do, nearly impossible in a really powdery, mellow field. But in a stale seedbed field, that's easy. It's going to be nice. It'll be as flat as a no-till field typically after planting if you get your planter set right. And then there's also advantages of workload distribution. So if you've got to work the ground and you get that done, get that out of the way, it gives you more time to be timely with your spraying applications, more time to be timely planting. It just takes some of the pressure off of that planting window in the spring. So another thing to be thinking about this time of year is what's your fungicide plan for this year? And are you willing to be flexible with that plan based on environment? And the way you need to be flexible with fungicides might be to change your timing, change your rate, change your number of applications based on what we're seeing in the growing season. So your timing options in corn are V5, VT to R1, and then R3, R4 in my book. Now, you'll hear people talk about pre-tassel like V12, V14 stuff. I'm not really in that game, and you'll hear people talk about brown silk. I'm not really in that game either. So to me, there's three windows: V5, VT, R1. So VT would be tassel, R1 would be silking. That's the sweet spot. And then if you want to do a later post pass after your VT R1, that would be R3. R3 would be milk stage, R4 would be dough stage. And then soybeans, I say they have three windows as well. The early window in beans would be early flowering or R1. So if you're wanting to tackle white mold or just going after a yield bump or something like that, that might be an appropriate timing. Then there's the sweet spot in soybeans, which is late R2, R3. And then there's the later window in soybeans, which most people have never even tried, of R4, R5. So those would be the three windows in soybeans. And in each of those windows, you've got a range of rates, you got a range of products you can choose from, and there's kind of an infinite number of things you could do. And you can consider, do I use insecticide? Do I not use insecticide? Pretty common to use insecticide in soybean fungicide applications, not as common in corn. And in some cases, you might be getting more of a benefit out of the insecticide than you are the fungicide, which is a good reason to have it in the mix. Plus, it's generally the cheaper of the two products as well. And then you've got options for foliar fertilizers and biological products that some people like to include with fungicide. So it's easy to get carried away on these applications, and all of a sudden a $18 fungicide with insecticide, with some fertilizer, with some adjuvants, with some application, and maybe with a biological or two, all of a sudden your $18 fungicide's a $50 application. Like, how in the hell did that happen? So you gotta, you can go too far with that stuff, and we got to keep return on investment in mind. And beans aren't $14 anymore, as you probably noticed. Okay, good. That's not Jennifer calling me. So anyway, lots of things to consider with fungicides. And I've got a program prepaid, but I hope I've got enough dollars in there to cover what I end up doing. But I may need more of this or less of that, or I may change something, or I may add an application. I may need a lot more product than what I've got prepaid. So just be flexible. Some of the things that we need to be flexible about would be, primarily weather driven when it comes to fungicides. Also, planting date can be a factor as well. One thing we are going to really watch close this year, because we've learned over the last two seasons, I think the most important thing for tar spot to get going, get started, and have the potential to be bad is really good growing conditions in June. If we have plenty of moisture in June, if we get our corn crop in early, if it's off to a fabulous start, If it looks like $1,000,000 in the middle of June, if you're starting tassels at the end of June, that's the perfect environment for tar spot, especially if we've had a lot of humidity, a lot of moisture, and it's been a little on the cool side. If it's been hot and dry, like we were the last 2 Junes, record dry conditions last year in June, we couldn't find tar spot till damn near harvest. It needs good growing conditions early to get started. Once it gets started, it can keep itself going with less than perfect weather. But, if you thought it was hard to be a corn plant last June, it was even harder to be a tar spot spore last June. So the weather we had last June was exactly what tar spot cannot stand. So if we're having a hot, dry June, well, probably less likely tar spot's going to be a thing. If we're having a moist, normal temperature or moist and cool June, that's when we need to be vigilant against tar spot, being a problem. You're not going to notice it's a problem until later in the season, but it's getting its start in your fields in June. And when it gets its start in your fields in June, it has July and August to get bad in time to do a lot of damage. So that June weather plays a big role in the potential for tar spot severity. Doing too much talking here this morning. Need a little. Okay, so we're going to end here on probably the most controversial topic of the morning, unless I start talking about carbon or sequestration of carbon dioxide or something political, which is possible. You could maybe get a sneaky question in the chat there and get me fired up on something I shouldn't be fired up on. I think I'm going to get fired up at this meeting I'm going to later. I'm going to try to be good because I like the guy that's hosting the meeting, and I don't want to be a problem for him. So anyway, let's talk about planting date. So there's already some beans in the ground. Jim Donnelly's got some sweet corn planted, so way to go, Jim. And he planted his susceptible check in his tar spot nursery where he's trying to grow tar spot. So Jim Donnelly's got some corn in the ground. Probably other people do as well. We had, and Jim told me, he says, "Oh man," he says, "soil was perfect." We've had really good soil conditions for planting, and so every time we get these early planting windows, and you've got really good soil conditions, it's tempting to think, well, man, who knows when the soil will be this good again? I hate to pass this up. And last year when that window was late March, early April, man, it was hammered down. Even though the weather forecast looked kind of crappy and it was cold out there, but it was dry and it was fit. This year it's been warmer and dry and fit. So just a reminder, there is really no data to suggest that there's any increase in corn yield planting before about April 20th. That doesn't mean that your April 1st planted corn is going to be worse than your April 20th planted corn, although it has been in recent years. But there's no data to support that it will be better. Now, if you're using the logic of, well, yeah, but if I wait, I might end up with May 15th planted corn, and I don't want that. That is a mentality that I would like to see changed, because there's nothing wrong with planting corn May 15th or May 20th. The last couple of years, corn planted May 15th has been significantly better than corn planted April 15th. No guarantee that's going to happen either, but I think we live in fear of not being done with corn before like the 5th of May. And that fear makes us do irrational things. If you could do one thing for me, it would be to do not live in fear of still planting corn May 20th. That doesn't mean you're a bad farmer. Might mean you're a better farmer if you have the discipline to be patient when you're planting corn. Now, soybeans, a lot more forgiving. Soybeans. I like the fact that we've got one crop that kind of doesn't care, and we can focus on that one in that early window. However, there is such a thing as too early for soybeans too, and there really is no data to support that there's any yield benefit to planting soybeans much earlier than mid-April. Now, it is true that in a lot of these planting date studies we do, that if you get a window in February or you get a window in March, if those beans survive, they will probably yield more than beans planted in late May or June. But they will not yield as much as beans planted in late April, typically. A lot of times, if you look at these soybean planting date studies, there's kind of a bell-shaped curve. Now, I'll try to draw it with this piece of paper. So down on this end, this end here is April, and this end here is May. So it looks kind of like that, where April down here on this end is better than May, but there's a hump in the middle, which is late April. So that was probably a really poor illustration, but basically, most of these trials would say that the February, March, and early April beans, while they're amazing, and while it's impressive that they even survived, are not as good as the late April beans. So really the window for both crops is not that different. You know, soybeans is probably shifted ahead about 2 weeks versus corn. But in our rush to be timely, you know, we plant a lot of acres on the early side of that curve where the yield potential is still going up when we plant. Now, you can't plant everything at the peak. I know you've all got a lot of acres to cover. I know you got to start sometime. And one of my favorite sayings is, if you're going to replant timely, you got to start early. So I get it. There is a lot of pressure to not pass up good soil conditions. And I do say good soil conditions are number one. I don't care when you're planting, if it's March 15th, April 1st, April 15th, May 1st, May 15th, June 1st. I don't care. If it's not fit, don't plant. So it's really, really rare that you can mud something in and have a lot of success doing that. So the soil has to be fit. And if your soil is fit on March 20th and you want to plant, go plant. Just be aware that there is no data that would support that you are increasing the yield potential of your crop by planting March 20th. There is data that would decreasing the yield potential of your crop by planting it that early, increasing your potential. So there's such a thing as too early. There is such a thing as too late, but too late is a lot later than sometimes we think it is. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with planting corn in the middle of May. And frankly, the data would say that planting corn in the middle of May is better than planting soybeans in the middle of May. Now, what's the danger in that approach? The danger in that approach is if something goes wrong and you end up finishing the middle of June or early June, I would a lot rather be planting soybeans than corn. So it is true. You know, you don't want to be that guy that focused on soybeans to the point where June 10th, you're still planting corn. Because if we lose the spring and it gets late, I would a lot rather finish up with beans. So beans are very unique in that they are the crop we should plant earliest, and they are the crop we should plant latest. Corn is in that middle window of, I'm going to say, April 15th to May 15th or 20th-ish is the window for corn. The window for beans starts earlier and goes later. So I have been I have been logged off of the chat this whole time. So if there have been questions to those of you who have been chatted in questions, but the limitation, I'm solo like this, and especially mobile like I am, it's nearly impossible to monitor anything in the chat. So I just got my fingers crossed. I've been live the whole 49 minutes and 40 seconds that I've been on, like it says I have been, because when I'm disconnected from the chat, it always makes me nervous. I'm disconnected from everything. But anyway, apologize that we didn't get any questions. We didn't answer any questions today, especially if you asked a question that I was not able to see. That's extremely rude on my part, and I will make sure and answer those questions 2 weeks from now when we're back together, which would be, what would that be, about the 21st of, get my calendar here. Yeah, it should be like the 21st of March. So might be starting to get exciting then. Yeah, so 21st of March, and hopefully, if Adam or Jennifer have the time, and I don't have some weird conflict, we will be back in the studio with a more normal Ask the Agronomist, which I would like to do. It's been a long time since we've had a normal one. I've been at weird locations. I've been having guest hosts. I've been sitting in a truck at a grain bin site off of Highway 150 in Knox County, Illinois. If you're wondering where I'm at, I'm close to Dehinda. If Dehinda means nothing to you, maybe Williamsfield, and if that means nothing to you, let's just call it Peoria. So I'm between Peoria and Galesburg, basically, is where I'm at today. Awfully good soil here. When I said I don't see anything that looks like this. My home's not too far from here, but it does not look like this. So anyway, appreciate you sharing your time with me today and helping me celebrate what? Yes, National Fall Burn Down Appreciation Day. It might even be an appreciation week. Maybe a day is not enough to properly appreciate fall burn down, and that gives us a little more of a window there to hit the timing right. But I hope you got something out of the morning, and I'll be with you again in 2 weeks. Everybody take care and be safe.